Good day, and welcome to the Plant Engineering webinar, Know the Facts About Today's Manufacturing Workforce Demographics and Salaries, and How to Use ERP to Build Bridges Across an Ever Wider Manufacturing Skills Gap. Today's webinar is sponsored by Epicor. We'll be joined by Andrew Bolivar, Director of the Center of Excellence at Ultra Consultants. I'm your moderator, Kevin Parker, and editor with CFE Media and Technology. In August 2018, there were 508,000 open jobs in manufacturing, according to the 2018 Deloitte and Manufacturing Institute series on the skills gap and the future of work in manufacturing. While retiring baby boomers are often cited as a reason for the shortfall, surveys indicate the greater culprit is a shifting skill set caused by the introduction of advanced technologies. Surprisingly enough, however, it turns out the most sought-after skill is the ability to learn, whether it be about technology and computers, digitalization, programming, or simply critical thinking more generally. The Manufacturing Institute maintains that collaboration platforms, work-based social media, and instant messaging all can support the high-quality communication needed for higher productivity. In today's webcast, besides looking at some of the most interesting aspects of markets for highly trained employees, such as engineers and technicians, we'll look at how today's enterprise resources planning system, as a single source of truth in the manufacturing enterprise, encompasses these collaborative tools and others. It can be an important means to realize and sustain a skilled workforce. To get the best results from the webcast platform, please make note of the following as you participate in today's event. If you are having technical problems, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of the screen to bring up a list of system checks to make before escalating to an online technician. If you experience issues with the slides or audio, please refresh the browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's headshot. If a technician is needed, type a message into the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Answers to technical questions will be in the Answered Questions box. The Ask a Question box is also used to ask the speakers questions. Ask questions at any time during the presentation. We'll get to as many as time allows. To download the presentation slides and certificate of completion, use the Event Resources box on the left-hand side of the screen. Download the presentation and certificate of completion until the conclusion of the webcast. The link will break when the webcast signs off. This webcast is being recorded, including the Q&A session. We'll send you an email message within a week with a direct link to the webcast archive. Before turning to today's discussion, now we'd first like to share with you a video from today's webinar sponsor, Epicor.
Many mid-market manufacturers recognize that Industry 4.0 will impact their manufacturing operations sometime in the future. But today, many still aren't sure exactly how or when this will occur. The good news is, manufacturers are already well prepared for this, as machines on the shop floor already include sensors that provide real-time data to floor managers and the operations team on performance levels. But how do you make sense of all this data? For starters, a manufacturer's ERP system must have the ability to collect, filter, and analyze data at critical points in the manufacturing process so that users can make better decisions based on insights from real data. This is why it's crucial to select an ERP solution capable of leveraging new technologies to bring information to those who need it, when they need it, and in a way that they can act upon immediately, anywhere. With these capabilities, the value to business comes from increasing the reach of ERP to every part of an organization, making it as usable on the shop floor as it is in the boardroom. The future may not be here, but it's coming, and manufacturers should move now to ensure their ERP platform is future-ready to adjust Industry 4.0 demands and support the industrial Internet of Things.
Welcome back. I'd now like to share with you a brief presentation on workforce demographics. I've called my presentation "The Politics of Productivity" because productivity is the single measure of all of the factors that contribute to output in terms of output per unit of input. And I've called it the politics of productivity because of all the human and social functions that surround the production efforts that take place in manufacturing industries every day, including the cultivation of knowledge and skills. It's often said that today we live in a knowledge economy, but that's hardly new. If you go back, you find the recognition of the importance of knowledge and skills goes back to ancient times. The very first sentence in Aristotle's Metaphysics is that all men by nature are actuated by the desire for knowledge. And if you go 13 centuries further up into the Middle Ages, you find the philosopher John Duns Scotus saying that happiness, in other words felicity, consists in the acquired cognitions of the separated substances. And that's a big part of the reason why we go to work every day, and that's a big part of the reason why we're here today. So you see in front of you now some of the numbers that apply to manufacturing in the most general sense. And manufacturing is defined as establishments engaged in the mechanical, physical, or chemical transformation of materials, substances, or components into new products. So in other words, we're talking about discrete manufacturing, where we're making things like cars or airplanes, as well as chemical processes, and flow processes, and batch manufacturing as well. So in the one case, we're talking about how many, and in the other case, we're talking about how much, just to clarify that basic distinction that you hear in manufacturing all the time. And as you can see, in all of manufacturing employs almost 13 million people in the United States today. Now, if you go back in previous years, that number has fallen slightly, but it's really not too much less than the total number of people that were involved in manufacturing in the 1950s even. However, if you compare that 13 million to a total population of 327 million people in the U.S., it's a much smaller percentage of the total population, as I'm sure you can imagine. And then of that almost 13 million, almost 9 million of them are employed in production or non-supervisory roles. And then when we look at the unemployment rate across the known manufacturing population, it's a very low 2.7%. Below that, in the chart, what you're looking at is some of the up-and-coming, the fastest-growing occupations according to statistics from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Department of Labor. And by mathematicians, I'm assuming that what they're catching there is some of the data scientists and data engineers that we see coming into the manufacturing enterprise as a means of capitalizing on all of the data that is today available as a result of the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT. So you can see that we're talking about a pretty substantial increase in the number of mathematicians or data engineers employed in the manufacturing industries between 2018 and 2028, and that they're projected to get a pretty good salary of over $100,000, and that compares pretty equitably with what we see the median annual wage for the engineering professions. You look at operations research analysts, it's sort of the same story. Those are people who are very much trained. Operations research, as you know, is the application of scientific principles to business management and provides a quantitative basis for complex decisions. So again, we're talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence and the impact that those technologies are starting to have in the manufacturing industries. And we all know how important software applications have become in every workplace. I think I may repeat this observation again before the webinar is over, but no matter what kind of a scientist or an engineer or a technician you are today, they all have one thing in common, and that they spend most of their day sitting in front of a computer. What you see in front of you here are some additional statistics about the engineers' employment in manufacturing, and in 2016, there were almost 600,000 engineers employed in the manufacturing industries, the most of any. And the largest number were found in computer and electronic products, transportation equipment, and machinery, with an average salary of more than $88,000 a year. I included this next bullet point on engineering services just because I think one of the ways that the skills gap is being closed is that those who are vendors of high technologies are finding that they need to provide a much higher level of services than they did in the past, whereas a decade ago, let's say, every software provider was trying to position their software as something that the users could buy and implement and use themselves. Think of supervisory control when it just came in a box that was shipped to you, and you opened it up and took out the cassettes and loaded them into the computer. Whereas today, manufacturers need help both in deciding, once they've committed to the technology, how they're going to use it, and then number two, how they're going to bring it online. And another example of that would be, of course, ERP implementations, where over a period of many years, we've gotten away from big bang implementations to more periodic or incremental implementations and bringing new functionality online. Another point of interest to us here at CFE Media and Technology is the number of engineers who end up in management positions. And here you can say that the Bureau of Labor Statistics identifies more than 50,000 engineers as employed in that function, those kinds of functions. When it comes to engineering technicians, it's a little bit more difficult to get much information about where they stand, but again, the Department of Labor Statistics sees them with incomes of more than $57,000 a year and continuing growth in employment. And here are some actual statistics within all, given a population of 327 million, the Department of Labor Statistics sees 115 million and a half of them as being active full-time wage and salary workers with an average income of 88 points, a median weekly earnings of $886, which translates into about $46,000 a year. Within that, 2 million, almost 3 million of them are either engaged in architecture or engineering with an annual salary median of $77,000. And then after that, you kind of see the hierarchy of the engineering professions as we see them here at CFE on a day-to-day basis, and it's kind of borne out by the salary levels you see here, with the chemical engineers being at the top of the hierarchy, followed by the electrical engineers, and then the industrial, mechanical, and petroleum engineers. And then I've included operations research analysts at the bottom. So you see, of those listed here, we've got a average salary range of $46,000 a year at the low end, up to a high of about $96,500 for the chemical engineers. Here are, when we get a little bit further in here, you'll see when engineers are asked about what the other types of skills that they see the enterprise and their departments as most needing. Software developers and computer network architects are part of that, and you can see that demand kind of reflected in the statistics here, where the software developers are making median weekly earnings of almost as great as that of the highest flight of engineers. When it comes to where the work is found geographically within the United States, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a lot of different variations for all different kinds of specific work functions, but at the end of the day, almost all of them closely resemble the one that we're looking at right now, with the deepest green being indicative of where the most work is. And as I say, that kind of extends across the board as far as other professions go, or other functions or specialties within the engineering specifications. Now I'd like to turn a little bit to the way we work now. Obviously, I think all of us are familiar with the kinds of presentations that are being made regarding the fourth industrial revolution and how work is being transformed through robotics and automation, and especially, I think, in terms of my own interests, the impact of analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And although, as it says here, these technologies are likely to create more jobs than they replace, as illustrated by the tight labor conditions we're experiencing today, I think the question for a lot of people is whether they are going to be pushed out of the workplace based on these new technologies. There may be more jobs in the end for people who are coming in and receive that training, but it remains an open question for their future specifically. But I think there's a lot of indications that the engineering profession is more than willing and able to adapt to kind of a changed landscape. So here, as I said in the beginning, the estimate that there will be 2.5 million positions unfilled and a $2.5 trillion hole in manufacturing gross domestic product at risk over the next decade due to the introduction of advanced technologies and automation, misperception of manufacturing jobs, and retirement of the baby boomers. So again, there seems to be something of a paradox where when we think of training and skills, it's something really specific that you learn how to do, whereas 50% of manufacturers say they have already adopted automation, and the top skills that they really need are critical thinking, programming, and digital orientation. And some of the recommendations for dealing with that is tapping into the resources from the retiring generation. I think we've gone from a period of time not that many years ago where many people were contemplating early retirement, and then after the Great Recession, it's kind of switched around where you have more and more people working past their official retirement age and staying engaged. So I think I attended a presentation where they talked about in the future we'll be working in environments where there's really 4 generations, just as more of us will someday watch our great-grandchildren grow up just the way previous generations have seen their grandchildren. We'll also be experiencing more generations in the actual workforce. And we'll all be involved in human-machine collaborations of many types and probably deeper relationships than the ones that we have today. We'll be looking for public-private partnerships and bolstering apprentice programs. As far as apprentice programs go, I think it's a type of training or gathering of skills that's proved much more popular in Europe than it does in the United States. About half of all young people in Germany participate in one. And then roughly 1 million people today are participating in apprenticeships in America, compared to about 20 million enrolled in colleges and universities. And of course, the practice of using interns in the United States is much more prevalent than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. They're still mostly found in the skilled trades, although in the past 2 years, according to the Deloitte, more than 700 programs have been created in white-collar or new-collar fields. One of the biggest obstacles is employers' reluctance to invest in the upfront costs of training workers who could take their skills elsewhere before the costs are recouped. And Amazon has begun a program. They're helping veterans. A lot of the automation companies, I may mention this again, have started similar programs to the one Amazon has here. And some of them are looking specifically at veterans from the U.S. military as being some of the best prospects for those technical support jobs, and doing many of the same things that Amazon is doing. Even some of the mid-sized automation vendors are setting up these programs now. So when Deloitte and Manufacturing Institute put their heads together and started thinking about the personas that we're going to see in the future in terms of manufacturing roles, here is a list of the ones that they've kind of described so far. Digital twins, supply chain networks, robots, I'm not sure what a digital offering manager is, drones, smart factory, and scheduling. So planning and scheduling has really been a form of machine learning or artificial intelligence that's been with us for a long time, but didn't really, wasn't really called that. And that's where a lot of those operations research people come into view. Now I'd like to turn to a survey that Control Engineering, one of the publications within CFE Media, has sent to our readerships, and we've gotten back some feedback on these actual subjects that we're talking about today. And here, because we're talking about process control and automation, the majority of those taking the survey have been electrical engineers, although there's representations from others as well. And when we asked them what functions was their facility outsourcing to third parties, what came back to us was, I think, of interest, leaving aside the control panel fabrication as being number one and not at all unusual. We look at the systems integration as being, the number 2 or 3 in terms of what they bring in-house, as well as the green indicator of information technology. So again, a lot of what we're talking about here is the joining of the actual computers themselves as being a platform, and the subject matter experts as being the engineers, and them coming together to bring skills and tools to bear in the most effective way possible. And when you ask them why do they outsource, they clearly say about 40% of them pointed to the lack of skilled talent and the need for them to focus on their core competencies. So again, we're talking about more engineering services coming from suppliers as a way to meet that tremendously high demand for a better use of information technology. I mean, I think you see the difference when, if any of you were around when supervisory control was first introduced 20 or 30 years ago, and you could send away and they would send you a box with your software in it, and the process engineer would sit down and work out their own process or automation piece on the floor on their own, and those markets just grew at a tremendous pace, whereas you see a little bit of drag in the markets for IIoT and analytics just based on the shortage of skilled individuals. And again, when we asked them what the biggest threat to their manufacturing business was today, the absolute highest answer was the lack of available skilled workers. So it would seem that what we're talking about is something very real and something that a lot of our readers and listeners to webcasts are experiencing today. So while you see what when you ask our audience what is it that they most need to know, they invariably point to the engineering skills that they already have as being the most important. And after that, while computer skills and technology skills are important, what really counts in the workplace today is communication and presentation skills and project management skills. And when you think about it, in an age of integration as we're in today, integration, the entire enterprise is integrated around ERP. We have supply chain systems. Those are really platforms. Computers aren't being used as much for calculators today as they are being used as communication tools. And what we have to do is bring our own communication and coordination skills in terms of project management to bear using those platforms. So in some ways, that's really what is lacking, and that's maybe not even something that's taught in schools, and certainly something that you can learn on the job if you have the potential as easily as you can through an apprenticeship or attending classes. So then, for those of you who are interested in that ever-pending salary survey question, our survey found that, from Control Engineering, found that the average salary among survey respondents was a little bit over $100,000 a year, and that's for the mix of engineering disciplines that I pointed out before. And in addition, they average non-salary compensation of about $10,500, and the 73% of them counted on receiving a bonus. So now to dig in a little bit deeper on this issue of how IIoT, analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence are being integrated into the enterprise, I've written a number of pieces recently on this topic, and one of the most interesting things about it to me is that this drive for integration and this idea to make greater use of the data that we have in hand is really driving careers in the engineering ranks. And I was talking to Drew LaFleur, who's a Chief Technology Officer with Technical Toolboxes, and they're a maker of software for midstream pipeline makers in the oil and gas industry. And as he points out here in the quote you see in front of you, in his experience, he sees a lot of engineers who are working already today as data scientists, and they have the motivation to bring the data together quickly and learn new processes and disciplines quickly. That makes them productive, and other people often leverage their skills to ride in the wake of those efforts. So, you know, with a tool like Technical Toolboxes, it's doing the calculations for them. But what the engineers have to do is they have to be able to evaluate the inputs, and they have to evaluate the outputs to see if they're realistic and make sense on the basis of what they know. So it's a different role for the engineer, but still of equal importance to what came before. And you know, another example of that is when someone is picked to lead an ERP implementation. That's really a key differentiator, because from that perch, if you will, they get involved in the entire enterprise, all of its different functions. They're exposed to the entire operation, rather than just being pigeonholed in the engineering department or purchasing or whatever it happens to be. So that introduction to a wider world often ends up being a opportunity for an advancement. And then finally, following on that same idea, talked to Aidan Doyle of Siemens, and what he's talking about here is that you know, invariably when you find a large software implementation, it involves someone who's a visionary, and they're motivated to forge those integrations and find better ways of working, and really advance their careers in a number of different ways. So, you know, that kind of concludes my presentation. You know, there's something really telling in the fact that a lot of this is related to money, and some of the other questions that we asked on the control engineering survey was, well, how much of this is, you think, simply a factor of manufacturing industries not paying their employees enough? And there were certainly enough people who took the survey that were willing to entertain that proposition. And if you look at the way these advanced technologies are migrating into the various industries, it was the financial industries with their huge resources who were first able to take best advantage of artificial intelligence. And then you find the oil and gas industry. Houston is just full of startups with bringing on the new technologies. If you look at the scope and scale of the oil and gas industries, that's not surprising. But regardless of the reasons, it's, as everyone will say when they ask you how you're doing and you say you're very busy, they'll say, that's a good thing, isn't it? And you have no choice but to agree, and it is. So I think that that's what we'll be faced with the next 10 years. It's better to have opportunities for people than the lack of it, and it'll be very interesting to see how it all plays out. Thank you for your attention, and I hope the presentation suited your purposes. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Andrew Bolivar. Andrew is Director of Ultra Consultants Center of Excellence and a Senior Consultant. He guides clients through technology, analysis, selection, and implementation with a focus on enterprise resources planning, manufacturing execution systems, warehouse management systems, and forecasting and planning. He manages client implementation projects from kickoff to post-go live for ERP, MES, and forecasting. Finally, he is an expert in business process analysis, design and implementation for clients in food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, plastics, industrial equipment, distribution, and other industries. Andrew, welcome to today's webinar, and please go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. Great presentation, and thanks to everyone who's on the line there and joining us this afternoon. Happy to be here. So before we get started, I just wanted to take a very brief moment here to tell you who we are and what we do. So we are, as Kevin kind of mentioned, a consulting firm. We focus exclusively on manufacturing and distribution clients that are headquartered in North America. We do travel, so we'll go overseas. Most of our clients do have an operation here or there internationally, but that really is our focus. Primarily looking at the mid-market, we kind of define that pretty widely, between about 50 million upwards to $1 billion. Naturally, we've got clients, north and south of those figures, but that's kind of our sweet spot. And, our focus is really business performance. So a lot of process analysis, process improvement initiatives. Sometimes it's streamlining a process within the four walls. Sometimes it's bringing plans together and consolidating planning or something along those lines. And in many cases, as we're looking at how to improve performance, we're looking at technology. In most cases, we're getting down to the foundation. So we're looking at things like ERP, but we're also kind of setting longer-term strategies and supporting clients in kind of a 3 to 5 year plans where they might be looking at some edge solutions as well. Things like manufacturing execution, CRM, product lifecycle management, whatever it may be. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. And with that, we'll kind of move forward. So again, the conversation, I think Kevin's done a fantastic job of kind of laying the landscape of what's going on out there, but we're really kind of talking about the skills gap in manufacturing and what we're seeing there. So I thought, for my portion here, I would just kind of go through kind of 3 areas. Conveniently, I've got a true story about a client that I was personally engaged with actually earlier this year, that was challenged specifically around the demographics and kind of the shift in their workforce. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that and give kind of an anecdotal story there. I'd like to talk a little bit about enterprise technology, with kind of a focus on ERP, but how that's changing the skills that are required. And I think Kevin did a great job of kind of teeing me up for that. And then we'll talk a little bit about, what are the skills they're looking for and what are we seeing, right? So as I go through these topics, my perspective is very much on our clients and kind of our collective experience at Ultra as we've engaged with the market and supported different clients through their challenges and projects. Okay, so a little bit about a recent client that I think kind of encompasses a lot of the challenges that Kevin laid out. I can't get into too many specifics about the client. I don't want to give their name or exact location, but suffice to say they are a supplier to industrial manufacturing, architecture, and large kind of asset construction projects. It's a very mature industry that they're in, and as such, they've got a lot of veteran employees. I think when we ran the numbers, their average tenure of the employees in the organization was around 22 years. I think it's probably one of the highest numbers that I've encountered. From a technology standpoint, they're running a very old application. They're in kind of a niche vertical in the supply chain in their industry. When they needed applications, and they were kind of on the forefront of that back in the early 80s, there weren't many good options out there. Of course, there were some accounting packages and some basic kind of MRP type packages, but they didn't have what they needed. So they chose to develop their own, which isn't uncommon, right? Given the nature of our work, we see that frequently, though I don't know how often we see systems that are actually 30 plus years old still out there and running. And it was interesting to me that when we got engaged with them, we often hear we've got data technology, there's better options out there that will bring efficiency, productivity, so on and so forth, right? But in this case, they were quite confident in the application they had developed. It was stable. There was some concern about the folks who had developed it, their ability to support it going forward as these people neared retirement. But interesting to me, at least, the primary challenge that they laid out in front of us was what they had encountered over the last about 2 years as they were trying to bring in new employees. The challenge was especially felt in the kind of sales, quoting, and estimating area. So in their sales cycle, it's very consultative in nature. They need to understand exactly what the client's doing, what the application for the materials are, so that they can understand exactly what the attributes need to be. What type of grade, what type of makeup, the raw materials need to be to ensure that they support the customer's use. So in their sales organization, there was actually quite a few people with backgrounds in engineering, right? Some chemicals, some material engineers, and so on. And the challenge specifically for them was these folks were much older. Many of them were kind of nearing retirement in the next 5 to 7 year time frame. And as they were bringing in younger employees, some out of college, some maybe making a first or second career move, they were struggling with the technology that they had. And what they were seeing was there was an expectation of technology from the younger workers that wasn't provided by this 30-year-old system. And unfortunately, they were having a tremendous amount of turnover, right? These folks would come in, they had the skills, they needed to learn the industry, but they were so put off and struggling with this dated technology that they weren't willing to stick around. And that was a major reason that they decided that they needed to kind of look forward and consider some kind of new application set. Now, I mentioned that these new hires that they were looking at were younger, right? And we've all read and heard some of the characteristics of the millennial generation, or Gen Z as it's sometimes called, whatever exactly those numbers are. I've read everything from born in the 90s onward to all the way back into 1980. But it's this younger generation, right? And we commonly hear them referred to as digital natives, right? So folks that have grown up with Facebook and iPads and smartphones in their pockets. So it's a different perception of technology and a different skill set in terms of how they relate and how they utilize this technology. And naturally, as they enter the workforce, they're bringing this kind of sort of baseline expectation with them. There's a lot that goes to that, but I think when you talk about manufacturing distribution and manufacturing execution systems, ERP, and so on, there's a couple things that stand out in terms of what's expected. First and foremost, and this isn't just the younger generation, I think, is the mobile access, right? Everyone's all over the place these days. There's a shift towards working remotely or being more mobile, maybe splitting your time between plant A and plant B. And with that naturally comes an expectation of mobile access. And I think most of the ERPs have covered, checked that one off their list pretty well. The other is an intuitive user interface, right? And I think it goes with the next one about ability to easily interact with the applications. We go through a tremendous number of ERP selections and other technology selections each year. And I would have said 15 years ago and coached clients to try to look past the UI. You will ultimately get acclimated to it if you select that technology, and let's really look at the functionality. My opinion is in the last 15 years, there's been so much consolidation in, say, the ERP market, and functionality, I don't want to say it's been commoditized, but the days of these packages can do multi-site and those packages can't, that's kind of gone, right? More and more functionality is in more and more systems, even in the mid and lower tier ranges of applications. And as that's happened, and as we've all become more accustomed to things like our smartphone and the ease of use there's just this expectation that I'm going to be able to jump into this application and use it effectively and use it quickly. So I no longer coach clients to look past it necessarily, right? If it's something that you look at and the entire team, the presentation ends and the whole team says that's the most confusing software I've ever seen, that's important to consider, right? Because there's an expectation there. And the last one, and Kevin kind of touched on this, is around the social and collaborative nature. I think Kevin made the comment that ERP applications are far more than calculators these days. They're communication tools and collaborative tools. And as these younger workers are showing up, there's an expectation that they're going to support that. Again, these folks have used everything, right? Especially when we're talking about the younger generation. They're accustomed to this applications, right? When you sign up for Snapchat, or if you sign up on Facebook, or you open a Google Gmail account, you don't need 10 hours of training, right? You just kind of log in, you click around, you figure it out, and it's intuitive. And there's an expectation there. When we talk about the collaborative side of things, I don't know how many people on the phone may have used something like Slack, or maybe more recently Microsoft Teams, which is a competitor to it. When these applications started, there was, I think, at least in my experience with clients, there was kind of a pushback. And I think rightfully, right? Most of my clients would say, I try to get my employees to spend less time on Facebook, right? Why would I want to give them a quote-unquote business Facebook, so to speak, to use at work? But the reality is those applications have become very, very popular. They're supporting collaboration, communication in organizations, remote organizations, global organizations. And they're just, as the ERP vendors have looked at some of this, they have started to incorporate some of those concepts into their applications. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a few moments. And then the other thing is integration. Anyone who's looked in the manufacturing organization and taken a look at the kind of system landscape, there's a lot of applications. And if you think of, say, your order to cash cycles, your design, from the time ideas come through till we've deployed it into production and it's fully running. In most cases, there's quite a few applications at play. Maybe it's some Excel worksheets or some manual processes, but there's often, a quoting and estimating capability, a CRM tool in play, maybe a configurator that needs data from both quoting and the ERP master data set, right? So as we're trying to understand these processes, there's just a demand that we get this stuff tied more tightly. And I think there's been quite a bit of progress made to support that effort. When we talk about kind of some of the struggles there, there's a push by this younger generation. When you look at these surveys that are conducted, one of the themes that comes out of them frequently is, this, younger group, let's say 30 and under. There's a desire there to grow, to be part of the business, but to impact the business, right? There's a decline in this notion that I'm going to be an accountant to kind of hide in my corner office and crunch the numbers and go home. I think there's more and more folks that are interested in understanding that business and making some type of meaningful impact on it. And they struggle when the technology is dated. In this specific example, they had a laundry list of issues that those folks that were hired, came on board, and left within, say, an 18-month time frame were giving them. The technology was cumbersome, and in most cases, recording the work they did after the fact, but not supporting the work. That was a common theme. It was naturally difficult. You can imagine it was green screen. It was developed 30 years ago. Anytime that the folks were asking questions about the business, right? So, what is the profit margin on product line A versus B? They had to go contact IT, get a technical resource, explain it to them, let them go and evaluate the data sets and the data structures. And it was kind of this back and forth until they could get at what they were asking. And that could take weeks or months. And then, of course, the lack of integration. So, if you think about that order to cash cycle, I have to go over to my configurator and do one thing. I have to come back to the ERP and build the quote. I have to go back to the configurator and validate it. So there's a lot of frustration there. And then, of course, there's zero collaboration, right, in an environment like this. So just an example of the challenges that client faced. It's a theme that we see building more and more, and I think we're going to continue to see more of. So a little bit about the technology, right, as the workforce is changing. One of the primary things that I think has helped is, again, when you think of those end-to-end business processes, and I keep referring to, say, a quote-to-cash cycle that needs a configurator and a CRM and an ERP, there's been leaps and bounds in terms of integration and the ability to tie these things together. APIs are across the board available everywhere. The applications are much, much more open to integration than they were in the past. In some cases, we see clients utilizing iPaaS or integration platforms as a service. So something like a Dell Boomi, which is sort of a integration layer that you're using between the applications that helps the connectivity, makes adapting the data flow between applications much, much more fast, and also helps you tie, say, on-premise solutions to cloud solutions and so on. So that's a new kind of invention in the last, say, 5 years that's really starting to come into its own and supporting this. And what we see is in many cases, say an ERP vendor comes to the table, they got an idea of what your system application landscape looks like, and in many cases they are going outside of, say, an individual transaction, right, as a strategy. They're going out and they are partnering up, right? So they're going out and they're saying, hey, Sigma Nest, right? You're one of the top tier nesting solutions in the market. You're everywhere. We'd like to kind of put together an integration, a pre-built integration, so to speak. And of course, that needs to be tuned during implementation. But the connectors are already kind of there. And because they're built between the two software partners, they've done it in a way that each application can be updated or upgraded without breaking those integrations. So tremendous amount of change there. Kevin talked a little bit about AI. 5 years ago, I would have said it was far in the future. The reality is we're seeing it, and we're seeing it everywhere. And it's making its way into ERP applications across the board. And it's not just your Oracles and SAPs. We're seeing it in kind of your mid-tier solutions, your Epicors, your IQMSs, Plexes, and so on and so forth. One of the couple of the neat applications of it that we're seeing, I see it coming into chatbots. So if anyone's ever gone onto a website and purchased, or just browsed, say at Home Depot, for example, some drills, a little box pops up and it says, "Hey, I'm Andrew, and do you have any questions about what you're looking at? You can chat with me here. I'm here to help," right? In most cases, those are almost never an actual human, right? They're just a chatbot that's listening to or able to decipher kind of human language and provide answers. So, what's the price on SKU 123? It provides a response, right? We're starting to see that in ERP. So, if you think about my client, and the employee who wanted to know what was the highest margin product line, within this customer set, and they had to go talk to a technical resource, build a report, so on and so forth. Now they simply, in some applications, type that into a chatbot. It goes and does the homework and comes back and gives them either an answer or a link to, say, an Excel sheet that's already graphed out and the data's there. It sounds pretty futuristic, but the reality is it's here and it's working now. And what that type of stuff enables is the systems are starting to monitor basic processes. Applying payments, for example, is a great area where AI has been pushed out and is working very effectively. So it's basically looking at what are the payments that came in, what are the open orders, and what's the appropriate way to apply these payments to my customers' open orders to ensure that they get the appropriate discounts or rebates, and that they don't, go afoul of their terms. So what's happening is, as the systems are doing that and doing it better and better, someone's kind of watching, and the systems are just sort of raising, "Hey, this is kind of a unique situation I haven't seen. What should we do?" So just as MRP is kind of exception management for material planning, this type of technology is making many more processes sort of, management by exception. There's some concepts out there around things like data lakes. So massive pools of data that are being collected across numerous systems in the landscape, pooling all that data, and then the ability to quickly and effectively query that data regardless of the system source. And of course, all of this is, favorable to folks who really are interested in making that impact on the business. I mentioned a little bit about social platforms. I talked about Teams or Slack. We're starting to see that integrated into ERP applications. It's allowing people to have conversations, take a look at what's going on, track dialogue, track conversations, tag it to a transaction or an item number or something like that, drop a hashtag on it, query it. So all of that kind of stuff is happening and happening pretty quickly. Workflows that were so rigid, requiring very discrete business rules, are becoming more flexible. You can sort of tag yourself to a transaction or a quote and say, "I want to follow it," and be notified when it changes. So all of that's kind of coming to be as well.
Andrew, are you still there?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I am. Phone issue there. So again, on the Google search side, the ability to query data and do it in a more natural form. I call it Google search because it's almost that. You're going and you're saying Bob Wheeler as an example, and it's showing you past transactions, contact information, right? It's pulling everything out of the system and kind of showing it to you, just like Google may. So, one example I see frequently is, a buyer, right? I have a strategic relationship with a buyer. He moves from one customer, one site to the other. You can quickly query it, find the records, and do a quick update, right? And it's just things like that that are very simple, and you don't have to necessarily go digging around and looking for all the records that are out there. So again, just a simple way that this technology is kind of enabling quick business so that it's not so cumbersome, I think. And then a little bit on the skill gap itself. So what are we talking about with skill gap? I think Kevin covered this actually very well. I think when I look at clients, what they're looking for in ERP implementation teams and post-go-live teams and resources in general are who can leverage this technology, right? The technology is great, but I still need a staff that can utilize it to its full potential and drive meaningful change in the business by using it. And I think one of the things that's most important is, how can I leverage it quickly and use it as a window into the business? How can I use this to see what's going on, to stay in front of it? The days of I made my sale, I delivered my quote, I had all my conversations. Now I have to go back to an ERP and log, what I did. That's ending, right? It's coming to, how can I use the system to kind of see what's going on and become more proactive in nature? And through that, I think one of the primary skills, and again, Kevin talked about it well, is the ability to learn. There's a skill such as I know how to, tune a machine, or I know how to apply payments, but now how can I learn about the business, and how can I take a look at the business utilizing this technology, looking at a problem from one angle, thinking about it a different way, looking at it, through the technology at a different angle. There's a number of questions out there, right? And I think the important thing is to look for employees that are asking these questions, that understand what are the right questions to ask, and then can leverage that technology to get the answers and really move the needle. A little bit about system setup, especially as you're thinking about implementations, but this is a talent pool that I see a lot of engineers stepping into, both engineers and business and systems analysts, right? And I think these are folks that are just especially well tuned to stepping in, understanding how the process works, what are the constraints, and then how does that apply to the different switches and levers in the application. How should we best set this application up? If business changes, where's the lever I should go and flip in the application to make it better adjusted to that business change? And it's very, very important skill. And again, like I said, I see a lot of analysts and engineers stepping into that. So again, when we talk about the younger generation, there's some trends there. These are folks that are looking to move up. They want to move quickly. They want to understand the business. They've shown a propensity to be willing to learn from their more senior employees. But again, they really want to have that impact on the business. I think in most cases they understand the technology and they're well adapted to the more modern technology. When they get in, they're looking to improve the business. They're looking to understand the business, but they're not looking necessarily to get trained deeply on how to use some specific application, right? No one wants to spend 6 months getting an ERP training only to move organizations 5 years later and find that it's no longer valuable. Kevin spoke about apprentice programs, so I won't go into that too much. But I think the important thing there is we're starting to see more of it, and we're starting to see interns, especially out of more technical realms, getting into businesses, understanding the technology, and kind of getting their head around the business side of things earlier, which is great. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it back to Kevin for a couple questions.
Well, thanks, Andrew. We're a little bit short on time because of our loquaciousness, shall I say. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of quick questions, and then we'll let everybody get back to their busy day. You mentioned cloud, and that's about the biggest thing going in the ERP markets today, responsible for their renewed growth. If someone goes from an in-house on-premises ERP system to one that's in the cloud, does that change the skill set that manufacturing facility needs going forward, Andrew?
That's a great question, Kevin. I think it impacts the technical skill set that's needed in the IT department. There's still going to be naturally a focus on networking and infrastructure to some degree. Do we have the right pipes into the business? Do we have the right security settings? All of that still is there, but some of the more hardware-centric skill sets in IT tend to go away, right? I no longer need to worry about server configurations. I no longer need to probably worry as much about the specifics of maybe a desktop in order to run the application. So I think it changes there a little bit. But when it comes to the broader the broader skill sets required, in your engineering, in your sales, in your inventory, material handling, production, so on and so forth, I don't think it really makes much difference there.
Good job. Final question for you, Andrew. I'm asking for my own curiosity. You mentioned a data lakes. If ERP is a single source of truth, does the data lake reside inside the ERP system? Is it part of the ERP system, or is that something separate?
Yeah, so it is something separate. It is, if you think of a data warehouse or something, it's along those lines. It's just that it's gotten so much larger in terms of the amount of data that it can take and hold. Naturally, ERP would be a source of data supplying the data lake. So whether you did the query in ERP or did it over your data lake, you should be getting the same response.
Good. Thanks much, Andrew, for your help and support with today's webinar. That's all the time we have questions for today. I'd like to thank all our attendees for sticking with us and being a good audience. We hope it suited your purposes. For more information, go to the website links noted in the interface. I'd also like to extend special thanks to our sponsor, Epicor, for sponsoring today's event. Now that we're just about done, we'd like to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it because we use this information to improve our webinars. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering and Epicor, I'd like to thank you for attending. That concludes our webcast. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.